There were two things that the galaxy knows for certain about humanity. The first was that they were gone, and the second was that they existed at some point. Everything else was a fierce matter of debate, but it was generally accepted that it was good riddance to bad rubbish. At least, it was generally accepted by the people who matter, mostly to themselves. The professors, bureaucrats, politicians, and the like seemed to be the same kind of detached, self-assured petty tyrants, no matter what era and region you look at. Amongst the common people, though, there was a significant contingent of humanists who were just resilient enough to weather the persecution of their governments and the scorn of their contemporaries who rejected the idea that humans were a race that was a loose conglomeration of roving techno-barbarian murder bands, and were in fact the mysterious builders. The prevailing belief amongst the humanists was that instead of murdering each other in a horrible orgy of blood and madness until their birth rate couldn't compensate anymore, they had ascended to another plane of existence, and more were watching. One humanist in particular wasn't having a particularly good time. Nobody cold accused him of being an unfriendly Besest boy, but he was regretting taking the contract to transport a whole clutch of professor types of the Yurgle variety, a race of people comprised mostly of tentacles, mucus, and horrendous manners. The miserable best boy, Rovire, was sending a fervent prayer up to the great ancestor K9 to give him the fortitude to not space his passenger quarters the next time one of the academics goes on a rant about how his primitive faith in an even more primitive race of murder hobos was counterproductive to living a happy and productive life. Also, they smelled bad. Just so, when he went through the bulkhead to the main passenger recreation lounge to announce that the evening meal was available in the galley, he was assailed by one of the academics, shoving a hollow of one of humanity's lessons in his face and squealing about how it was conclusive proof that his so-called gods were bloodthirsty primitives. That is Saving Private Ryan, and is a tale about the value of courage and sacrifice in the face of adversity, he explained patiently. And they are not gods. They are a race of beings who gained the wisdom you take for granted through bitter trial and error. Nonsense, it squeaked. This is obviously footage of an actual battle preserved for the sole purpose of relishing in the suffering of others. Have you watched the file to the end? Roe asked, as he felt the urge to seal the bulkhead for a spot of space cleaning behind him rise within him. Why would I bother? So you could see that the humans preserved the names of the artists who made the fiction at the end? Or do you suppose battles had writers and special effects technicians? The lump of undulating unpleasantness began to quiver in rage, but before it could articulate just how backwards and primitive Roe was for disagreeing, Roe got a message on his in-ear communicator from his co-pilot. Gravity well ahead, sir. No time to recalculate. Fortunately, the argumentative Yurgle had barely enough social acumen to notice the sudden look of concern on the captain's face, and wisely decided to shut up. Did Lou make a mistake? No, the well looks artificial. Roe turned his mic over to Shipwide and announced, All hands, general quarters, weapons hot, prepare for emergency drop. Passengers, get to the lifeboats and strap in. Say again, get to the lifeboats and strap in. Why would we do the still quivering mass of tentacles stammered before he was cut off by what he or she, Roe couldn't tell, found to be a disquieting predatory stare? Pirates pulling my little passenger yacht out of hyper can only mean one thing. Roe didn't bother elaborating as he quickly made his way to the bridge, really more of a glorified cockpit with 4 stations, and strapped himself into the pilot's chair. His navigator Lou and his comms and sensors officer were hot on his heels, but his co-pilot was already giving the sitrep. Can't tell how big they are, but they're probably a cruiser, or else we wouldn't be worth the effort. The drivers are spun up, and the lances are warm enough to light up on drop. We only have 6 torps after that fight last week. Thanks, Red. Lou, can you recalculate on the fly? Depends, sir. They might have a jammer to keep us from getting a good fix on our drop site. Start with an estimation based on our current hyper trajectory. Already on it. Good girl. Balu, anything on the hyperlens? Just a grav cone. Prepare to drop in 3, 2, 1. The yacht shuddered as it dropped into real space and suddenly decelerated to speeds that wouldn't rip the little craft apart. Shields up, Balu. What am I looking at? The blue-furred Besest boy gulped as he confirmed what everyone already knew. Cruiser class, no IFF, Class 3 reactor. That thing is it's covered in weapons arrays. The profile is, it's okay. I know a Maw ship when I see one. Hailing. Open channel. Dethatch your passenger pod and maybe you'll live. Came the deep roar over the speakers, and the crew quietly thanked the great ancestor K9 for adaptive volume control. Thor, are you ready for a fight? Ro asked over the comms. Yes, sir, came the reply from the engineer. Keep our engines hot as long as you can. Remember, they're watching. Yes, sir. They see us, and we're the bestest boy. Ro was more than a little tempted to drop the unpleasant mass of ill-mannered anti-humanists to their fate. Well, not really tempted at all, but it was a funny thought. Ro took a breath and signaled to Balu that he was going to answer. I'm afraid I can't do that. How about you go find a nice planet with animals on it to eat instead? Then you too shall be our fodder. Ro didn't bother answering, and Balu just cut the channel and reported, incoming lances. The ship lurched as Ro rolled to avoid the incoming concentrated energy beams, and Red sent a stream of projectiles streaming from the belly turret toward the enemy. The Maw ship's shields lit up as the super-accelerated slugs shattered against it, but the ship responded by reorienting its lancers and taking another shot. Well, more of a volley. Lance fan ahead. You can't dodge, sir. Acknowledged, Ro said, as he pitched his ship to take only one of the lances and rolled to disperse the energy across the shields. Shields held, sir, Balu reported, as the captain nosed onto the Maw ship and opened up with the forward lances. Theirs? Hit, sir. Slight flare. Found their bridge yet? No, sir. Thor, how are you doing back there? A little hot and bruised, sir, but still alive. Red, switch over to explosive ammo. Use it or lose it, sir. Indeed. Red kept a constant stream of projectiles streaming into the enemy's shields from the belly and top deck mass driver cannon turrets, while his captain darted and wove around lancer volleys while trying to angle for their own lancers mounted on the nose. It all was depressingly ineffective, but with each hit from the enemy, shields holding was reported by Balu. Then, after putting a lance into the enemy shield, Balu shouted, Flicker, flicker, flicker! Dump your torps! Ro ordered, as he sent every torpedo linked to his console downrange and watched as point defense didn't bother even trying to intercept. 1, 2, 3, 4 torpedoes detonated against its shields, but the 5th and 6th torpedoes detonated against its hull. Where are we on that hyper calculation? At hyper. I have 3 E-vectors to Wells. Jammer is still up, sir, Balu shouted as Ro put another lance across the Maw ship, which did little more than leave an ugly scar across its armor, while Red put thousands of little craters in tight groupings around the lancer arrays. Thor, can you print us up? So the ship was rocked as Ro went into another energy-dispersing spin, and the shields flickered and collapsed. Shields down! Shields down! Acknowledged, Ro answered as he banked away hard as the enemy angled to bring their undamaged lancer array into play for another volley. You said 3? Yes, sir. Send those vectors to the lifeboats. Yes, sir. Thor, sit rep. She's crying for us, sir. Engines are still hot, but she can't take many more turns like that again. Reactor? Near capacity. Can you disable the hyperdrive and the engine limiter? Yes, sir. They're watching. Patch me into the lifeboats. You're live. You may have noticed that our shields are down. I'm going to give you a chance to escape, so once your boat is jettisoned, mash the jump button until you're in hyper. You'll be pointed at a gravity well that isn't here, so if we can get the jammer down, you can get away. Lifeboats away in 3, 2, 1. The bridge crew could hear the whining of the reactor as Ro nosed directly toward the Maw ship and punched the throttle. He opened up with the lancers, and Red put both turrets on target, while Balu and Lu closed their eyes and waited for their captain to say the words. The little passenger yacht leapt to light speed, normally used for entering hyperspace, and he said, Witness us. The instant before they collided with the Maw ship, Balu registered a received hypercom message, just one word in text only, Witnessed. The yacht-turned missile didn't destroy the enemy ship, but it did disrupt its jammer enough for the Yurgle frantically mashing the hyperspace button to wink out of existence. The black boxes of the lifeboats had also logged the message, but the academics insisted that it must have been a coincidence, and their story was suppressed by the bureaucrats to keep the humanists from using their tragic deaths for propaganda purposes, and conveniently ignored the fact that the crew were humanists practicing the humanist practice of heroic sacrifice to save the ungrateful lives of those who had scorned them. Despite this, the recording of the crew's last hours was mysteriously leaked to the net, and that had absolutely nothing to do with one of those professor types suddenly being a lot less derisive towards humanists. So far as Professor Glarion was concerned, it didn't matter whether the humans had witnessed Ro, Red, Balu, Lu, and Thor's heroism he had. He still couldn't figure out where that hypercom message had come from.